Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to share with you some thoughts coming from my project in DMIN. I studied the Millennial Pastor's Implicit Leadership Theories or Traits, and I will be sharing some of the things I discovered and found out in my study. So the topic that I'm going to share with you tonight is Millennial Pastors' Implicit Leadership Traits. The theoretical underpinning of this presentation is from the perspective of Sigmund Freud in the psychodynamic leadership. Psychodynamic leadership conjectures that leaders' personal history, which includes family dynamics, early childhood experiences, challenging situation, and cultural background. These are the factors that contributed in the molding of leadership traits of a person, or leadership development of a pastor, or anyone, according to Sigmund Freud. This leadership model points out that each person nurtures feelings related to family, authority figures, which are reflected in experiences with other significant figures in childhood and adolescence. So in the perspective of Sigmund Freud, she is conjecturing that in the first 7 years up to adolescence, these are the stages of which molded the behavior, the leadership traits or leadership development took place that would be carried over throughout the rest of the life of that person. And another theoretical underpinning of this presentation comes from the follower or the student of Sigmund Freud named Erik Erikson, and it is in the psychosocial perspective of leadership. And according to him, psychosocial perspective leadership uses all life experiences from birth to death as a scale to better understand leaders' development alongside with the human development as trigger events impact leaders. In other words, the events that contributed to the molding of leadership development of a person, that is from birth to death, according to Erik Erikson. And another theoretical underpinning of this presentation is social cognitive theory by Albert Bandura. This theory postulates that every person, learns, okay? Every person learns leadership behavior by watching what others do. In the realm of social cognitive theory, this study considered parents, teachers, and senior co-workers as role models from whom millennial pastors learn what leadership is all about. So according to the study of Oliveira, leadership development can be influenced by parents, teachers, and senior workers. They are being modeled or look up by younger workers, and this is also attested in the findings of my study of millennial pastors. Now, the social cognitive theory focuses on importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behavior, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Thus, millennial pastors, ILT, are influenced by both environmental and cognitive factors. So they process it in their minds, their cognitive, what are the things that they need to practice as part of their leadership development. All right. Now, leadership development is based on individual lived experiences, environmental factors, friends, technology, culture, and family dynamics. So here in this presentation, we can find that lots of things that that molded or shaped the minds of millennial pastors, their personal experiences, the environment that they were, where they grow up, peers, okay, and even technology and culture and family dynamics, contributed so much in their leadership development. And in my study, I found out that there are components of millennial pastors' implicit traits, and there are four factors. Okay, uh, cognitive, the social, emotional, the cultural, and spiritual, moral. So these are the components or factors contributed to the implicit leadership traits of millennial pastors. So I was able to discover four themes. Since this is a qualitative research, so I discovered four themes. But if we go to quantitative, then there are four variables, that contributed to the implicit leadership traits of millennial pastors. If you do quantitative research, then these are the variables that you need to consider if ever you are going to replicate the study. But anyways, let's try to study one by one with all these themes. Now let's go to the cognitive component of millennial pastors, ILT, or implicit leadership traits. When we say cognitive, it refers to the mind. So what are these cognitive traits that they are able to identify? So leaders, according to my participants, they are influential, they are determined, they are visionary, good at delegating responsibility, authoritative, commanding, and focused on achieving. So in this, these are in the cognitive level. Now let's try to see in other component, the spiritual moral component of millennial pastors, ILT. These are the sub-variables. We're going to have the quantitative research design, but here in the qualitative, we call it sub-themes of the spiritual moral components of millennial pastors, ILT. They are good at discipling, good at counseling, humble, okay, good at preaching with integrity, good at guiding, faithful steward, and principled and passionate in evangelism. So if you are leading millennial cohort, these are the things that you need to consider in developing your program in your district, okay? So we want you to develop a need-based program for your people, for the cohort intended. This is a contextualized approach in making program, because in my observation, as I observe these millennial pastors, they are doing these things. They are doing these things. I studied their Facebook wall. I studied the materials that they are, the artifacts, artifacts. I studied the way they behave. I studied their Facebook wall. I studied the materials that are distributed to the district. And in my interview, I triangulated it and I found out that these are the components in the social moral components of millennial pastors, ILT. Therefore, if you are going to deal with and to make programs for millennial pastors or for millennial cohorts, young people who are born from 1980 to 2000, these are the topics that you need to consider, and these are the programs, quality of programs that you need to do. All right. And for the social emotional component of millennial pastors, they are supportive. Okay. They wanted that their leaders to be supportive, fatherly, okay, compassionate. So I was able to have lesson on compassionate leadership, engaged in philanthropy, interpersonal relationship. Now here, the cultural component of millennial pastors, ILT, people or millennial pastors tend to be secular in their preaching and in their way of doing things, in their leadership. And let's try also to be aware of secularism that also shape our way of thinking, especially in leadership. And another thing is with pakikisama, not otak talangka, or we call it crab mentality, wala utang na loob. And another thing is with dagal or honor, or with hiya or shame. These are the things that come out in my study. And these are the cultural things that you need also to consider in your leadership, because if you are not very prudent with these cultural traits and practices, it can affect on your effectivity, and it can affect the integrity of your work. And also, if you are not prudent in or discreet in practicing or applying these cultural traits, it will hamper the work of God. Later on, we will discuss on that. Now, based on my research, participants' view of leadership role, they are pastors. So we can find that the most influential person to the pastors are pastors, and they are teacher pastors. Most of my participants mentioned that that they were shaped, their way of thinking in leadership uh, was shaped by a pastor teacher, the college professor in the School of Theology. Now you can see how powerful and influential pastor is. When I was in the district, people uh, tend to ask me about legal matters, even though I am not a lawyer, but they are asking about legal matters as if I am a lawyer. And also, they they come to me and ask for health issues as if I am a doctor. And some come to me with their, emotional issues. So I'm quite advantaged on this because I have a training on that. In other words, pastors being looked at by members because we are very influential. So pastor, and also as I mentioned, that there is the element in cultural, but for the secular, their leadership development is shaped by secular or infiltrated by secularism, because their idol leaders were politicians. There is also religious leader, parents, and church leader. Now, let's try to define some terms here in order for us to be guided in our study as we continue this our discussion. If we say cognitive, refers to the mental process of perception on how a person sees the world and the reality. The spiritual moral theme refers to the observance of the highest moral code. The socio-emotional theme refers to how a person initiates, cultivates, and responds to others while connecting with others. And culture is a pattern way in which people do things together. It's a way of life, culture. But culture is more than that. Another thing that we need to consider, cultural leadership is a leadership style that uses cultural values consciously or unconsciously in leading people. So here, my contribution in the research world at IAS, in the seminary, I was able to formulate what we call biblical cultural leadership development plan. Okay, so that is my contribution in the research world at IAS. So the biblical cultural leadership development plan for millennial pastors. So implicit leadership theories refers to the mental models, personal beliefs, and expectation by which individual tends to search for a leader to think of how they should be like and behave when performing leadership role. Now, what is a culture? What is culture? Culture encompasses religion. It's more than religion. It's more than food, what we wear, how we wear it, our language, marriage, music, and it's different all over the world. Therefore, culture, there is no superiority of culture. There is no higher culture and lower culture. There is, good culture. There is no good culture and bad culture, because culture is a moral. It's neutral. Okay, a moral or neutral. It means that what is good in this group of people might not be good to another group of people, because it is defined. Okay, the boundary is defined by a group of people that is exclusive to a certain group of people. So a culture is a way of life of a group of people, the behaviors, beliefs, values, symbols that we accept generally without thinking about them, and they are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. It means that culture is passed on. Therefore, culture is fluid. Okay, it's not permanent. It evolves as the time uh, goes by. So therefore, culture is not static. Okay, it's not static. It's a fluid. Okay, I should say. Now, let's try to consider culture. Um, there are three layers of culture. We need to understand this, that there are three layers of culture. The outer layer, or what we call the description of the culture, what people see outrightly. So the way people dress. So if you go to Baguio, and you can see people there are wearing a certain kind of dress, then you can right away conclude that these are the Ifugaos. Okay, may gabahag sila. So how they eat and what they eat actually is a description of a particular culture. Okay, so these are what we call cultural artifacts, the things that we see in the surface, how the person see dress, excuse me, how the person speak. If you speak Cebuano, then people may describe you that you are coming from Cebu or some region in Visayas, because you are speaking Cebuano. If you are Ilonggo, then their conclusion is, malambing. They are coming from Iloilo. So these are the cultural artifacts, the surface of the culture that can be easily seen and described by people. Another thing is the anthropological culture, is compared to an onion. The middle layer it has to do with understood, appropriate, or expected behavior and values that help those behaviors. According to Christian Montaigne, in other words, these are the behaviors and set of values inherited from the previous generation. You can see that these people are coming from Asia when they greet with each other by bowing. Okay, but if you go to America, the way they greet with each other is through handshake. So by way of greetings, you can identify where this person's coming from. That is the middle layer. Okay, their values, the way they behave and the way they act. Okay, that is the middle layer. But another one, which is very hard to understand, the core layer, which is the key beliefs or the shared worldview reside. We call it truth box. Okay, truth box. This truth box is a place where we just know that certain things are true about life and reality. We face them in our truth box and never considered or examined them. So we believe that those practices and traits that we inherited, they are true. That's why there are people who are not yet converted, or it's very hard to be converted to Adventism, because they believe that kung ano ang ilang aging bunagan nga religion or beliefs, they will die on that beliefs. So that is that is the worldview when it comes to faith or religion. And there are also Adventists who are baptized, but yet when trouble comes, they will go back to their old ways. If the doctors cannot heal them, then they will opt to quack doctors because their worldview is not yet touched by the Holy Spirit. That's why it's very important for us to understand their worldview. And when we do Bible study, we need to change their worldview by inculcating to them the biblical worldview. Uh, when their worldview is touched by the Holy Spirit, then there will be true conversion taking place. So worldview, or this core layer where we can find our professional ethics and work ethics. So that is very important. Now, as what I've said, culture is very important for us future leaders, for you future leaders of our church to understand, because if we really understand the influence of culture in your leadership development, then you will be in a better position in understanding why people behave that way, and you can craft, best approach in solving leadership crisis that will come in the practice of your leadership. So Philippines, as we all know, is a collectivist culture, and cultural values influence the practice of leadership. So one of the cultural practices in the Philippines is what we call pakikisama. Is one of the values that is also practiced in church leadership. So pakikisama is not only visible in the secular world, but also seen in the ecclesiastical realm. And being a pastor for 13 years in Negros Occidental Conference, even though they are not saying it, but they are practicing it. They are doing it unconsciously. They are doing that cultural traits of pakikisama. And we need to understand that pakikisama, because if we are not so prudent in practicing these cultural traits, the work of God will be at stake. Okay? Okay. So to some extent, Christ observed pakikisama in reaching out to people for his kingdom. So we can find that Jesus Christ grew up in a collectivist culture where decision is made by group, not by individual, that is collectivists. And there are, categories in collectivist culture. There are 5. I will not discuss that because we don't have a time, and it's not a topic for today, for tonight. So even Jesus Christ, observed pakikisama, but there is a limitation in his practice of pakikisama. All right, so what are the learning outcomes? I'm using the HATS, or what we call the higher order thinking skills in doing learning outcomes. At the end of the discussion, the millennial pastors can know the importance and implication of pakikisama in church leadership. This is our learning outcomes. Share the experiences as they uphold cultural traits of pakikisama within biblical context, and employ pakikisama with prudence to avoid compromising the biblical standard and making others subservient to the ulterior motive of a leader. Now, Filipino leaders can be influenced by cultural values. We like it or not, okay? We are influenced culturally in our practice of leadership. Filipino culture is a classic example of high context culture. High context culture is also a collectivist nature where long-lasting relationship and communication are expressed implicitly. Therefore, sometimes when you ask a person, they will not say yes, but they will just raise their eyebrow. It means yes. Oh, because we are communicating through symbols, not by words, because this is collectivist culture is doing. In a collectivist society, leadership development is also shaped by by culture. A leader needs to be aware that every culture require a specific leadership approach. So let's try to understand culture, because if you know and understand culture, then you can redefine your approach in evangelism and in leadership, a contextualized approach in leadership fitted to that existing culture, as long as that practice of leadership does not, or do not violate the biblical principle. So there are cultural traits like hiya, pakikisama, utang na loob, and utak talangka that contribute to Filipino leadership schema. Now, pakikisama in church leadership. The imminent threat of pakikisama in the organization is disagreement among group members. Based on the study of Saito et al., among the literary documents gathered about pakikisama trait, 85.5% of those documents talk about pakikisama. So, in other words, pakikisama is one of the dominant cultural traits practiced by people in the church, okay, and also in the secular world. Now, thus, pakikisama is the most practiced among all cultural traits. It makes Filipino known as friendly people. Because of this, pakikisama is easy to be along with. We are labeled as the most friendly people in the world because of this cultural traits. Pakikisama is a basic tendency for Filipinos, unexpressed in their private lives, in public workplaces, and in their relationship with their neighbors. So sometimes we are not confrontational because we don't want to appear bad with other people. So sometimes ginalunok ta lang ang aton ugtas just to appear to be good with our neighbors, with our classmates, because of this pakikisama. Okay? It's very important. Now, pakikisama is practiced also in the church leadership. During the interview, the millennial pastor stated that he is fair to those who supported him. This is a description of a pastor that he said that, he is very supportive to me because I'm also supporting him. But the implication is, if the other pastor is not supporting him, then he will not support also. So that's element of pakikisama. If pakikisama is employed for personal advantage, it can greatly affect the mission of the church. In the writing of Paul, the first century Christian experienced disagreement among church members. According to Ken Mossack in 2008, he commented that the first century church was plagued with interpersonal relationship problems because of power struggle among them. The Apostle Paul admonishes the Ephesian church to be patient, bearing with one another in love, make every effort to keep unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Now, as stated by Musa, within the church, Christians need genuine pakikisama that stands on biblical principle, not on superficial unity, personalities, or expediency. In other words, in my experience as pastor, there are people, especially it happens before the election, that they are campaigning for their own set of officers and directors. They group together. However, when one is chosen in the group and he was not nominated to be in a position, then this one who is not in the position tends to disagree with the one who is in the position. So sila naman nagpilinaway. But before they have that pakikisama, now they are becoming mortal enemies. So let's try to see that when we practice pakikisama within the bound of Christian standard, that it should be genuine without compromising the biblical principle. So in order to maximize the functionality of the church as a body of believers, there should be harmony among members. In other words, in the words of Ragwe, Through pakikisama value, the Filipino can readily understand the need to cooperate with and support the leadership, as well as maintain good relationship between the members for the overall good of the church and its mission. So pakikisama should be, again, in the context of the advancement of the work of God without compromising the church policies and the standard of the Bible. So it's very clear. Now, as we can see, Jesus also practiced this pakikisama according to, based on Matthew chapter 35 to 36, Jesus used pakikisama in reaching out to the sinful people. He went and dined with a tax collector, labeled by the community as the wicked members of the society. And Ellen White states, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed them his sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he bade them follow me. So we can see here that Jesus Christ, mingled with men and trying to inculcate the biblical, cultural values that we need to live. In other words, Christ is propagating the kingdom of grace to the people by way of changing their worldview, their belief systems, and their acting and behaving. Now, what is the implication of pakikisama to the church leadership? Pakikisama can be useful in church leadership if there is no ulterior motive in the part of the leader. However, the improper employment of this leadership can result in compromising of the church policy and manipulation. There are some implications of pakikisama to church leadership. Number one, pakikisama is a concept that an individual becomes subservient to the will of a leader or a group. In the minds of the Filipino, friends are investment. Friends can help in times of need. Their goodwill has to be cultivated by getting along well with them and avoiding disagreement. So sometimes we use these things in order to gain favor, not to the extent that compromising the standard of the church. Okay, another one. To be subservient to the will of the leader is vital for promotion, privileges, and perks. So we want to become, the underdog of that individual because, we want to be identified as a bata-bata of that particular individual so that we can have that extended authority. Okay? So because if you are close to someone else, then there are privileges. Just like the experience of one pastor, he is supportive to me because I supported him. So there are the privileges and there are the financial, there is that financial advantage if you are subservient to the will. You are always followed, even though the things that the leader is doing is not right, but you keep on following him. You dare not to disagree with him because you're afraid not to be promoted, or your privileges will be cut, and a lot of things you will lose. Okay, so conformity to the leader's desire is rewarded with assistance, while non-conformity is punished by withdrawal of leadership support. So you will be afraid that you will not be promoted. So that's why you do it. All right. Number three, pakikisama can also be abused by some workers in forming groups for personal interest by campaigning against church leadership during the constituency meeting. So if you have personal disagreement with that person, personal alitan, then you will say, okay, just wait for the constituency and I will form a group to destroy you so that you will no longer be in office. So that is very important. Now, as stated by Ellen White, we need to be reminded on this. The greatest want of the world is the want of men, men who will not be bought or sold, men and their inmost souls are true and honest, men who do not fear to call sin by its right name, men whose conscience is as true to duty as little to the poor, men who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. So God wants his people to maintain our individuality and not to be dominated by the dictates of others. Pakikisama is a good cultural trait, but it must be observed with utmost prudency. So I hope that this presentation help us as we continue to think on how we can develop our leadership skill. May God's blessing be with you today.